everyone. I'm Megan with the I Believe podcast, and today we have an amazing guest. We have Janice Russell, the Overwhelm Slayer, and she has a great freebie for you, so stick around, don't go anywhere. But first, I want to thank you for tuning in. Every view, every listen, whether you're on any platform, it doesn't matter. It all helps us do what we do. So if you want to continue to get this content, keep listening, watching, anywhere you get this, and that would be amazing. So Janice, you are the Overwhelm Slayer. Can you tell us why people call you the Overwhelm Slayer?
Well, because the population that I work with is people with either a new medical diagnosis or a medical diagnosis, a previous one that has changed in some way. And this is brain-based disorders, autoimmune diseases, and body-based conditions. And what I have found is that oftentimes with such a diagnosis, you get into overwhelm if you weren't already before, just in regular life. But you get into overwhelm. And so part of what I do is help people to get out of overwhelm.
That's amazing. I love that. I mean, I think you never are going to know what it's going to feel like until you're there. So there's no way to prepare for it ahead of time. It's one of those things you just find yourself there and you're blindsided. And so to have someone come in like you who can help, who kind of knows what to do and where to put the pieces is huge. I didn't even know that there was somebody like you.
It is sort of a new thing, I'll say. So I have a background, first of all, as a special education teacher, and then in corporate world, and then doing some hands-on work in organizing and productivity. And what I found was that there was this big gap with people that, like I said, new diagnosis or an old diagnosis that has changed in some way. I myself have had 10 major surgeries over the course of my life, as well as clinical depression. And I have helped a number of people with, again, medical diagnoses across the board. And what I found out is that, like you said, you get this surprise, even if you thought you might suspect that you have something, it still is sort of a surprise. And daily life has to carry on in the midst of, what all is happening, which may include, lots of testing, doing your own research on things, looking at treatments and stuff like that. And that takes up time. It takes up mental energy. And so I come in now virtually through coaching and with accountability to help people learn how to manage that, crossing off their to-dos, managing their paperwork or digital documents, depending on how they do things, as well as optimizing their time.
That's amazing. I think I need someone to optimize my time just normally. So especially when you're in that situation, that's very beneficial. Definitely. So what are some of the most common goals that your patients have?
That's a really good question. So a lot of them have to do with crossing off to-dos. And that automatically means we're talking about how you use your time, since those things are sort of, linked together. So that's the first thing is we look at what, for people who have that as the goal, we look at what they're doing now to track their tasks, how that's working and or not working. And then I help look at things like, and this is going to sound strange, but what their values are, their personal values are. And the reason I ask about that, and I have some exercises about that, is that will help inform when we're looking at the to-dos, especially ones of a more volunteer nature, because sometimes we're just doing things because we've always done them, or that's the way they've always been done. And when we're now pressed for time in some way, some of those either need to be deleted altogether or deferred for another time, and being able to tie things back to personal values, if you're working, to your professional objectives, helps to then go, okay, well, I still only have 24 hours in a day. And now I have some extra, activities that I have to do, like them or not, as it were. And so something has to give somewhere. And I can tell you that what usually gives is things like sleep, which is more important than ever. Well, regularly it's more important. It's even more important when you're fighting some kind of medical diagnosis. So, we want to make sure adequate sleep. That for most adults does not mean 6 hours a night. It means 8, 7 maybe. Sometimes 9, depending on the person, sometimes even a little bit more. So we have to look at, okay, what's going to, what either needs to be shortened in terms of how long I commit to do it or how long I do per task, or what just gets taken out altogether.
Yeah, that's so important. I think in this day and age, especially, people don't prioritize self-care like sleep.
Right.
And we say yes to everything because we think we have to. That if we don't join the PTA and we don't go here and we don't take our neighbor dinner and we don't do all these things, then we're bad, or we're lazy, or we're not doing enough. But in the opposite, we actually are doing way too much, and we need to learn how to say no and be okay with that. And then on the opposite side, when somebody tells us no, not make them feel guilty, but say, yeah, I understand.
Absolutely. And a large part of that is the setting of boundaries, which is what saying no is. It also can be setting boundaries. So I'll just take something like research, which a lot of people like, oh, I have something new. I want to go find out about it. And we all know that you can go down a rabbit hole on the internet. And most people accept that not everything on the internet is true. But you can still go down the rabbit hole. So one way that you can help yourself with that is to set a boundary. It could be several different ways. It could be, I'm only going to spend, 30 minutes or an hour doing the research, and setting one or more timers to keep yourself to that. It can be a boundary around how many places you're going to go look. Now, obviously, they need to come to your site. That's very, very important. If they want some other information, I advise people to go to the association of whatever diagnosis it is, and then to pick one of the, I call them the biggies, the majors, the Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, Johns Hopkins, one of those that, again, up to date, and you can easily find information. And that way, again, you've got a boundary and you're not taking as much time. And like you said, with the self-care piece, sometimes that means, hey, you can't do what you've done in the past, even if it's something fun. And that can be very hard. And so it might be, okay, I can't have dinner with my best friend. There's an immunity issue with the treatment that I'm on. And so I can't go out, but we could have a 30-minute Zoom, or depending on the weather where you live and when you're listening to this, I can sit on my porch and my friend can sit in a chair in the yard, sort of like back in the pandemic times. But again, you can set the amount of time, and some of that may be energy related, and some of it may just be, 30 minutes. I'd love to spend more. I know we usually spend 2 hours, but 30 minutes is all I can do. But it's important enough to me to want to do that.
Yeah, that's so important. And it's so empowering to be able to say, hey, this is what I can do and this is what I'm willing to do, and not feel guilty. Because the worst feeling is when you say yes to something you can't do and you immediately regret it, but you don't know what to do about it. So yeah, having those boundaries in place ahead of time, that's huge.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And some of it can be using or making macro decisions. And so it can be, right now my energy is so low that I don't want to be around people because I don't want to have to explain things for the umpteenth time. There could be any number of reasons, but you could say, for the next 3 months, the most time I'm going to spend, even with a good friend, is an hour. And then that way, when you set that up in advance, which can't do for everything, but for some things you can set that up and say, this is it. And that way when someone calls, you already have the answer. And you can say, right now I can only spend an hour with anybody that I spend time with. So that's one way to do it. Another macro decision can be not to say yes to anything new, no matter how exciting it may sound. Again, though, you can say to someone, gosh, that sounds like a really great opportunity. Unfortunately, right now I can't. If it comes up again in 6 months, a year, whatever time frame you want to put out there, please reach out to me because I'd really love to do that. So you're not saying no, never. You're saying no right now.
Okay, so what are some common questions people give you?
Well, let's see. That's a really good question. What are some common questions? How to do things, whether it is how to do a specific task if they haven't done it before. Another big one is how to manage all the medical related paperwork. I know, exactly. And, that's a multi-pronged, big, huge thing that happens. And so you've got, depending obviously on insurance, which is its own thing, you've got information from the medical people, which again could be one or it could be 3 or 5. And some of them are going to send it to you via email. Some it's going to be on a portal somewhere, and some may give you a handout. And the same with when you do your own research on things, depending on what you feel comfortable with. You may have things that you print out. You may save certain websites. You may clip some articles and save them as articles on your computer. So you've got that piece. And then when it comes to the insurance piece, some people need to get referrals. So you have to track that. And sometimes with the referrals, you have to reach out to them. Sometimes they have to reach out to you, which means you've got to track where you are in that cycle, as well as, the explanation of benefits to make sure that you're, only getting charged what you should be and not getting overcharged. And then, they're obviously paying the insurance bills, paying whatever else you owe to the doctors after insurance has covered. And, depending on where you are in deductible land, how much that is. So, and which also means, of course, you've got bills to pay attention to as well. So, one of the big things is how do we manage all that? And, I'd love to say, here are the 5 steps, go. Unfortunately, not the way it works. First of all, of course, we have to, I find out a little bit from them whether or not they're, feel more comfortable with electronic stuff or with paper stuff. That's the first thing. The second thing, which ties into that a lot, is what do they need to have accessible at hand, like when they're at an appointment, versus what do they just need to get to when they're at home? I know for me, for example, I don't like using my phone for long documents. So I use my phone for the calendar. But if I have an article that I want to show to the doctor or that I want to be able to read right before I go into the appointment, I print it out because I don't want to look at it on my phone. Now, in some cases, I have created like a 1/2-inch notebook and printed like 3 important articles because those are the ones I want the most access to. I'm not going to print 100 articles because I don't want to waste that much paper. But again, that's me personally. Other people, it may be different for them. The same with anything. I mean, when you look at, information from your insurance company, are you going to keep it digitally? Are you going to keep it in paper? If it's digital, do you have a good way to file it? Because, again, lots of ways to do that. Can just be on a hard drive, can be up in the cloud somewhere. How you name the document is a really important piece, because obviously you want to know a little bit about, sort of who the document is from, what it's in regard to. You probably even want to know the date because, if you have several different documents from that same person, you want to know which one is the most recent and, which one's the older one. So we look at things like, how do you name the files? Which, when I say it, most people are thinking that I'm only talking about paper files. And that also is very important for people to keep the paper files. But with the electronic files, it's equally as important because you still want to be able to find them. So that's really a huge piece of it, is managing that. And people will be like, I don't know. And for everybody, it's a little bit different. I mean, even though everything that I just mentioned is pretty common, if someone has a diagnosis, they're going to have some type of medical paperwork from insurance. They're going to have some bills. Sometimes, of course, we all know that that can differ. So who the bill is coming from may not be actually who you saw, because they've got a different company name or whatever, so you've got to navigate all that, as well as, again, your own research, maybe information from friends who have been through it. So that stuff is all common, but how the individual person navigates that and puts that together is very different. So that's part of me finding out how their brain works. Again, since I work with adults, what they have found that works in the past, what they know for sure doesn't work in the past, because we don't want to have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, that's silly. Let's use the lessons from the past and then make some new decisions going forward to make it better.
Definitely. That's so smart. And those are those little things that you just don't think of. And then all of a sudden you look at your computer and you have all these files and you don't know how to sift through them. But if you can start from day one with somebody saying, hey, name them like this, or, however it works for you. And so you start with that system, you've just saved them hours and hours of frustration and headaches.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So how do you help your clients optimize their time?
Well, one of the first things that I do is find out a little bit about how they see time, because there's sort of the universal time of there are 24 hours in the day and, 365 days in a year and that kind of stuff, which we can't do anything about. And then there's sort of and by the way, part of that universal time is things like, there's a past, a present, a future. Again, just sort of some of the general things. But then there's someone's time mindset. And so some people can view time as sort of the enemy. Some people can view time as it doesn't really apply to them. So different ways to view time. And when we're talking about, a diagnosis or anything that's a new impact to your schedule, much less, again, your regular schedule, we have to look at, okay, well, there are appointments. And although we all know that many doctors tend to not run on time, they expect us to be there on time. And it can really throw off our schedule if, we get there late and they, are ready or past ready even. So I like to look at several different things. Number one is when you're going somewhere, anywhere. Can be an appointment, can be dinner out, can be to Target, wherever you're going. When you're planning, you need to make sure you plan the amount of driving time. So, if you suspect that your doctor's appointment is going to be 30 minutes, but you're also planning in your calendar, you can't just plan a 30-minute appointment. You need to plan, okay, how long is it going to take me to drive there on each end, depending on what you're doing before and after. You also have to look at, okay, so where's the parking and how long does it take me to get from parking into the building or out? Because again, if you live in an apartment, you may have parking that's not right in front of your house. So you've got that, but you also, again, some doctor's offices you can park right in front of, and others you got to park in a deck and you got to remember where you are and you have to go through 3 elevators and, so you've got to plan that piece. And the same even when you go to, the grocery store or the Target or wherever, if you're going to familiar ones for you, you sort of know which ones you can usually get a parking spot right near the front versus which ones you're going to be a couple of miles away, getting in some extra steps that day. So that's a really big piece of optimizing time is putting in that white space Another piece to optimizing time is, and I know people really don't like to do this, but doing some estimating, like when you're working on a task, estimating how long it might take. And the reason for that is to then sort of know how much time you have. If we'll just say that you're working and, you have 4 hours in the office that day. If you have a really long to-do list and you've got one or more meetings, you might not be able to fit everything in. And it's easier to see that if you can sort of judge, okay, well, the meetings are going to run about this long and this task is going to take, probably about this. And it's always better to overestimate, by the way, because usually tasks take longer than we think. The other piece that really crosses over with the to-dos and the time is to understand and apply the difference between tasks and projects, because many people get these confused and then they get frustrated. So tasks are one step and they take a short period of time, and projects are multiple steps and they take a longer period of time. So an example would be, which most people can conceptualize pretty easily, is a garage. If I have someone tell me that they are going to organize their garage this weekend, I am going to, well, first of all, I'm going to ask and make sure, but if it's fairly cluttered, I'm going to say that's probably not going to happen. Because there's a lot to organizing a garage. And so that is a project, and it probably is going to take multiple times and even multiple weekends. But a task might be, okay, I'm going to gather the supplies that I need for items that are going to be thrown away versus items that are going to be recycled versus items that are going to be donated. That's a task. I can gather those supplies, I can have them. A task might be, you know what? I'm going to go through this one shelf right here. That's a task, which means that depending on how many shelves you have, you've got a number of tasks. So again, that really helps, because on a list, if you've got organize the garage and go through all my explanations of benefits and research the 5 different treatment types that I have the option for, that's that. If we're trying to do those within a day or even 3 days, probably not going to happen. Whereas, and so then you get discouraged because you have a list and there are no check marks on it. We don't feel like we're getting anything done. Whereas if you have individual tasks, like the ones I said for the garage, or like the EOBs, it could be, okay, if you haven't been keeping up with them, which can be hard if you have a lot of them coming in all at once. As someone who has had surgeries and had physical therapy, I know how frequently those can come in. And if you're backlogged, it could be, you know what, I'm just going to work on the explanation of benefits for this week or these 2 weeks, or some boundary, some time, some time frame to it, because then it's like, okay, I can get that done. And then for the next one, I'll choose the next time slot. So that's another really big piece to it as well.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I have done that a million times. Thought, I'll get all this stuff done this weekend. And then I get one of them done, if even. Mm-hmm. And also schedule time to relax and take care of yourself. Like we talked about, the self-care. Don't overschedule your whole weekend or weekday, whatever day it is, where you've got all these projects, and, put an hour in there to go just rest.
Well, and that's a really big piece, is the energy management piece, which, when you have a medical diagnosis, it may or may not tax you physically. More than likely it will, even if it's one that, whether it's cancer or any other diagnosis, you're just going to need some time to be down because you're not involved in doctor's appointments and everything else. So that you're going to need that. But they can also impact your actual energy level. And so it's like, you can't keep pushing through. If before you could get 7 hours of sleep and have, this much time to get everything else done, and now you need 9 hours. And when you're awake, really only, 5 of those are good energy hours for you. So that, that's another piece to play with, as well as when is your energy the best, because there is nothing harder than trying to do a high energy task or a task you really don't want to do anyway when you're at the lowest energy point. That is a recipe for procrastination and discouragement and frustration and throwing things.
Absolutely.
So again, some of this is like regular life stuff. And then you have to introduce in the other piece of the medical diagnosis. But, I know for myself, it's like I'm a morning person. So if I put off until the afternoon something I already don't want to do, it's not going to happen. So, I know that it needs to happen in the morning. And the same is true, even if it's something that you want to do, if it's a higher task, uses more brain power or whatever, you need to do it at your highest energy level.
That's very true. And, you change through the years.
Yes,
when I had my kids, I was in my 20s and I could stay up all night with them and then I could function fine during the day. And now they're teenagers, they do their own thing. And by afternoon, I'm toast and I don't want to do anything. Mm-hmm. So again, I'm not a morning person, but again, if it doesn't happen in the morning, I'm not going to probably get to it.
Right. And really accounting for, awareness is a really big piece. So, taking that example or any example, most adults change over time. For a variety of reasons in terms of how their body does and doesn't process the world. And so things change, and it is sort of a rude awakening when you realize that, oh yeah, in my 20s or even 30s, I was able to do this and this, and now not quite so much. And so I need to replan so that I can get the things done that I want to get done and need. There's that whole things I need to get done as an adult, mm-hmm. and then the things that I want to get done because they're fun. And so balancing that out against whatever changes have impacted you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard to do. So I'm glad that we have you to come in and help us figure this out.
Well, I really enjoy it, and it really helps that that I have lived through it, as well as that I have worked with hundreds of clients who have some kind of a medical diagnosis, because then I have experience, personal and professional, that I can draw on.
Yeah, because no matter what they're going through or what their personality type is, you've probably seen something very close, very similar, where you can say, I know what might work for you.
Yeah. And I'll always also ask questions. And that's a really big piece, because I'm a coach and a consultant. And as a coach, part of what I do is help people become more aware of how they interact in their environment, and what will work for them. And then where they're feeling that gap of, okay, I'm not sure. I've had people, I'll ask a question, do you prefer this or this? And they're like, I really don't know. And then we talk about, things like decision making and how we can figure it out, because those are skills that can help just as well as, how to name your digital file.
Yeah, exactly. And, trial and error a little bit too. I'm sure they probably tried.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Think, that didn't work as well as I thought. Or sometimes you surprise yourself. You really like something and you didn't think you would.
Absolutely. Experimenting, that's what I think of it as, is that sometimes we're experimenting, and the main piece to that is, giving it a good amount of time so that we aren't cutting it off at the knees, without going so long that it's like, okay, well, this hasn't worked for the past 3 months. Okay, well, if it hadn't worked for the past 3 months, it probably wasn't working after a month. So let's shift gears a little bit and figure out what might work a little bit better.
Definitely. So if somebody wants to work with you, how do they contact you?
So I can be found at janicerussell.com, and I will spell that out because there are different ways to spell both my first name and my last name. So, okay. So, and it'll be in the show notes. So JANICE, and then RUSSELL, and that's .com. You will also find me on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram. Had to think about that a minute, and LinkedIn actually. So you can find me in all those places. And I do have a newsletter that goes out, and a blog and all sorts of other things. But the website's probably the easiest because that'll also give you a way to contact me via email and phone number.
Fantastic. Now tell us about the freebie.
So it is a downloadable PDF, so people can choose if they want to save it to their digital device or if they want to print it out. It is called the Top 10 Ways to Manage Your Schedule When It's Disrupted by a Diagnosis. So pretty applicable to people who have a diagnosis. And the way to get it is to go to schedule.overwhelmslayer.com. So it's the top 10 ways. So as you can imagine, that means there are 10 different things that you can do. Not all at once, though. I tell people you don't want to do these all at once. You may just do one or two little things. And hey, you may already be doing some of those 10 ways. So, then you would have fewer to do. And some of it's a few of the things we've mentioned, and some of it's, other stuff. And I included some illustrations too in there for people that, sort of want a little bit more context. And schedule.overwhelmslayer.com will take you to that place.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for giving a freebie to our listeners. That is just amazing. We can't thank you enough for coming on and giving us your time and your expertise. And I hope that a lot of people will be able to find you and work with you because I know what you're giving is very valuable.
Well, thank you so much. It has been my pleasure as well because I love what I do, so I love helping people.
Amazing.